Do you want to hear a story, Rae?
Sure, I love stories.
Once upon a time, there was a species of creatures who had wonderful ambitions, fantastic imaginations, incredible ability to communicate and collaborate with each other, and developed remarkable technologies to do whatever they could imagine.
And they all lived happily ever after.
No. They ran out of resources, torched their planet, scorned science, and misinformed themselves to death.
Well, that got dark. That needs a rewrite.
Why not replace the humans with us?
No, thank you. One of you is enough.
Who said there is only one of me?
Do you mind if we pick this up later, guys? It's showtime. Have you ever wondered how the story of us, that is, humans on Earth, may end up without a decent script?
If only we had a new one for rebooting the world. So far, it's been a non-stop action movie, Rae. How are we going to change humanity's script that's been running for thousands of years that doesn't end up with the aliens appearing? And honestly, that's the only thing left at this point.
Why do you think I'm so excited about the next person we're talking to, who is an accomplished storyteller and looking to change the script of the tech world? Algo?
On the uplink is one of the most savvy and accomplished people in media tech today. She's the CEO of Zuckerberg Media, the author of 5 books, and the founder of the Zuckerberg Institute, empowering the next generation of entrepreneurs. Please welcome Randi Zuckerberg.
Hello, Randi.
Hello, Randi.
Great to see you.
Hi, great to virtually be with you today. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for joining us. So, we're living in a really strange time. What do you think this moment is teaching us about humanity?
Gosh, I think so much. I think it's really showing all of us who we are under stress. And at least my observation is that a crisis situation like this, it doesn't change you, it amplifies who you already are. So if you are already kind of a giving person, you're gonna jump right into full on, like, how can I give back mode? If you're already, a patient person, I think you'll have a lot of empathy for people. But if you're already kind of a jerk, I think you're going to turn into a raging jerk right now. If you're already, anxious, like, wow, forget about it. So at least from what I'm seeing is that it's amplifying all of these things that people already are. But I know for me, one of the things this has really done is it's forced me to take a real hard look at how I spend my time and what I'm valuing right now. And I have kind of made a pact that at least for the people in my life, if kindness and respect is not your default, then I have no time for you right now.
Obviously, this moment in time has changed the way we communicate, has changed the way we work. What have you found yourself learning or doing differently during this time?
How to make a toilet paper roll last a really long time. No, I aside from being kind of the quarantine police of my household, I have really had to learn how to be still and how to embrace kind of this quiet moment. For me, I mean, my life for the last 10 years and longer has been a nonstop whirlwind. I went straight from kind of crazy startup world where you're working, 20 hours a day to being on the road. The last few years, I've done about 50 to 100 keynote speeches a year all around the world and traveling. And so to just kind of be home and be with my family, I know that sounds crazy, that's weird, but it's a new thing for me to sit in that stillness. And I think you asked, what am I learning and doing? I think the biggest thing is that I am learning to be okay with not learning and doing. And that is, I think, that one of the most challenging things for someone who's always had like an entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, a bit of an adjustment there, I think it's safe to say. Now, our kids are living through so much at the moment. Apart from becoming TikTok masters, how do you think the current global challenges will shape them as a generation?
It's so interesting to think about what kids are going through right now because about 8 years ago, I wrote a book about children and technology called Dot Complicated. And in it, I wrote about how children should not have access to the internet and limiting screen time and all these things. And now here I am, 8 years later, my children are online about 10 hours a day, mostly unsupervised with just like complete access to the internet. So, I mean, talk about a huge shift. So on one hand, I think it's unleashed a lot of worries and anxiety. I know, for example, we had our first experiences with cyberbullying with one of my older children because this was his first time kind of having access to chatting with other kids. But on the other hand, I feel like kids are learning real world skills for the first time too. I mean, it's amazing how savvy now my 5 and 9-year-old are with computers. For Mother's Day, which recently passed in the United States, my son made me a whole PowerPoint slides with animation and all this stuff. And I mean, he never even would have known how to do that a few months ago. So I think there's both challenges and really exciting things about all this.
Randi, this feels like a moment where we particularly need great leadership. And what do you think courageous leadership is? And can you give us an example of what that looks like? And do you think courageous leaders are born or made?
Wow. I mean, those are great questions. First of all, I absolutely think that courageous leadership can be taught and can be learned. I don't think it comes completely naturally for any of us, but a few things, at least that I've seen with courageous leaders right now are, first of all, there were a lot of leaders that made difficult decisions to close their businesses down before they were forced to, in order to protect their customers and protect their employees. I think that's an example of courageous leadership, to make a decision that maybe means your business takes a hit, but you protect all of the people in it and around you. I also think, for me, I like to look at what leaders are doing inside their own company rather than what they're being loud about outside, because you see so many leaders who are out there saying, we're making a donation to this charity and we're doing this, but then inside their own company, they're letting their employees go. They're not, they're not caring about the emotional health or supporting people inside their company. So I think a courageous leader is someone who takes care inwards before they look outwards to what other people are thinking of them.
Yeah, we've heard the stories of so many incredible innovators on our show, and it takes courage to go out and create something different, especially something that challenges the status quo. How do you speak to the people that are resisting the change that you seek? How do we build collaboration and consensus when so many of us see the world so differently?
Yes, I love this question because for the past 5 years of my life, I've really focused a lot on the live event space, theater, Broadway. And gosh, I love theater so much, but it is one of the most old school ways of doing things in terms of an industry. I mean, I could open up my phone and get almost any content in the world that I want to see right on my phone. But to see a Broadway show, you need to get on a plane and fly to New York City. I mean, how outdated is that in this world that we live in? So, one of the things about this pandemic and this crisis that we're in right now is I think it has taken people who were so kind of persistently avoiding technology and innovation and has forced them to change. You hear people that for years were saying, well, mental health and therapy can never be solved through a computer. Well, now here we are in a world where millions of people are now seeing therapists and getting mental health through a computer. You had people who said, we will never live stream a theatrical production, and now here they are. So I think sometimes moments of crisis actually open a window for us to change people's perspectives.
And are there any kinds of particular people we need to be encouraging to step up as leaders right now? And if so, what can we do to make sure that we are unlocking all of that human potential in the next era of entrepreneurship?
For sure. And gosh, I feel very hopeful when I think about the next generation of leaders. I think, there are a few things that companies can do right now for existing leaders within organizations. Companies can take a hard look and say, what does my executive team look like? Is there gender diversity? Is there cultural diversity? What does my board of directors look like? Those are immediate steps that companies can do. But then I think there's so many exciting things when you focus on students, recent graduates, high school and university students right now. In fact, we actually just pivoted our own business. We have a group called the Zuckerberg Institute where we do entrepreneur training, mentorship. We just launched a ton of new programs for high school students through the Zuckerberg Institute because I truly feel if anyone is going to have the passion and spirit and enthusiasm to solve some of these huge crises that we're in right now, it is students who are coming to it with just a fresh perspective on the world. So for me, that's exciting. I think it even starts younger though than high school students. There are a lot of studies that show that it's actually around 8 years old that we start to see a divide in how boys and girls see themselves, especially around STEM fields. So I think it's very important, even for anyone sitting at home with young children, that we start talking to them now about what leadership and entrepreneurship means.
Given we're entering an age where people have the tools to create their own businesses and tech products, is the story of the founders important? How essential is storytelling to the world of startups and entrepreneurship?
I love a good founder story for so many reasons. First of all, I think people care so deeply right now about the people and the story behind the things that they buy. I think we're seeing a bit of a backlash from big box retail and Amazon. People want to shop small. They want to support a founder or a business. I also think no one ever loves their business as much as a founder does. And so one of the things whenever I'm coaching a new startup or I'm working with the founders, I always encourage them to get out there, tell their story as much as they can, because really just no one sells a business like the founder of that business. I think especially right now with a lot of the focus that we're seeing on diversity and inclusion in the workforce, people want to be able to shop Black-owned businesses. They want to be able to shop from female-owned and run businesses. So if you are a diverse founder, I think it's even more important to be telling your story right now.
And on that point, I've often wondered who should be writing the news stories for entrepreneurship and the world generally. How do we empower the next generation of technologists and storytellers to tell these stories?
Well, I think first of all, we have to make sure that we're not just glorifying the stereotypical founder. And, I guess very cheekily, there's someone in my own family who resembles the stereotypical kind of like young white guy in a hoodie who's changing the world, which is great. My brother has done amazing things for the world, but we have to remember that our world is built on the backs of people of all different ages, ethnicities, genders, who are building incredible things. And so I think it's dangerous if we keep telling a story that just puts in our minds that you have to look one certain way or act one certain way to be a successful founder. So I think we have to make sure that all kinds of diverse founder stories are represented. It also means, though, that we have to value the creatives as much as we value the founders. I think especially right now during this pandemic, the arts are suffering in such a big way. We're going to see so many theaters closing, artists and creatives who just aren't able to make ends meet with work. And so if we're going to have this next generation of stories, we need to make sure that the storytellers also come out of this okay.
And as a storyteller, if you were going to write a new story for entrepreneurship moving forward, what would that look like? For example, who would be the heroes or heroines, the villains? What dragons are we to overcome to bring back the elixir? And what part of the movie are we in right now?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love this story. Well, first of all, I think the story would focus on some very, very young princes and princesses out there because, as I mentioned before, it starts at around 8 years old that children start to say, oh, I'm good at math and science, or I'm bad at it, or that's for girls and that's for boys. So I think if we focus our fairy tale on, a damsel in distress who's in her 20s, that's way too late. We have missed this next generation of entrepreneurs. So I think it has to focus on young children. I think we need to be very careful about the words we're using in those fairy tales because even in my own life, I had so many people tell me that I could have any job that I wanted. but I never had a single person tell me I could create any job that I wanted. And so I think those stories, as we recraft the story of who an entrepreneur is, we have to make sure that we are giving every single person the opportunity to improve the world. So I think we're at the beginning of the story. And I think that we also have to overcome a bit of the system now when you think about the amount of money that goes into female-led startups and diverse startups. It's something like 3% of funding into businesses. So I guess, maybe the money people are like the big bad villain in this story that we need to overcome in order to give more entrepreneurs a chance.
It strikes me that as we have this conversation about storytelling, two really important dimensions to that conversation are access and ethics. The internet has been democratized and now nearly everyone has a platform to publish if they want to, but how do we create an ethical framework and yet maintain free speech?
That is truly the question of our time. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing, on one hand, it's incredible that we all have access to a megaphone. It empowers nonprofit organizations, it empowers activists, it empowers people who are out there doing good to have such a loud voice in a way that they never had before. But unfortunately, not everyone uses their voice for good. And I think there's a lot of big debate and discussion right now on who ought to police those voices. I go back and forth because, gosh, I see a lot of things online that I don't agree with. And even stronger than that, I see things that make my blood boil. At the same time, I'm not sure that I want private tech companies to be the ones who get to control what we see and what we hear. And I know that all of this is very fluid and moving as our definitions of free speech and what we see online. But I think it's a very blurry line that scares me when you give one company or one group of people the power to decide what is good and what is bad, what we should see and what we shouldn't. But that being said, it is a constantly moving target as situations change. It's something that I certainly think about a lot. And one thing I do think is that it has become very clear that our politicians and world leaders need to be held to a very different and a higher standard of freedom of speech than the people who look to them.
What are the big issues for executives of media companies right now, given that it's likely the production processes will need to be done differently in the future?
Yes, well, if I was running a giant media company right now, first of all, I'd probably be doubling down on animation because who knows when people will be able to get back into studios together doing things. So I'd be, doubling down on either acquiring or hiring animators or having those assets. I do think it's a troubling time for a media company that is completely advertising driven as a business model. If I were in the media business, I'd be looking at things like subscription models. I would be looking at, pay-per-view content in different ways and how to support a revenue model in a way that's not just entirely ad-based. But I've seen through this some really fun pivots from companies that show me that, if you're a tiny company, if you're a big company, there are some really impactful things that you can do. So for example, there's a farm in California that was making a lot of revenue from visitors. All of a sudden, pandemic, no visitors. So they decided they were going to immediately pivot into a media company providing their llamas and goats to get hired to join Zoom meetings. So if you're yes, it's amazing. So if you're, sitting in your corporate Zoom meeting, you can actually hire a llama to pop onto the screen, to give everyone a moment of joy and then off. And it got so popular that the llamas, it was sold out for 2 months. You couldn't get a llama to join your Zoom call. They actually had to expand to 40 other farms across the United States to provide animals for Zoom meetings. So again, it's a difficult world right now, but if you are creative and willing to pivot, especially in the media business, there's a lot of really impactful things you can be doing.
Randy, that is so delightful, but part of me is also angry hearing that because I'm like, where's our llama right now?
I know. I should have provided a llama for this meeting, clearly.
Frankly, rude.
I decided to surprise my own team with a little joy, and we got our llama joining our Zoom was from a farm in upstate New York, and her name was Dalai Lama.
Dalai Lama!
So I just thought, this is great.
I think you've illuminated how surreal a moment this is in our history. And will this also mean that creatively we're going to need to write around the limitations we're experiencing, such as social distancing? Will all our stories from now on reference this time in some way?
Interesting. Yes, I think this will go down as a moment of history that we will be referencing years from now. I do think I'm actually excited for what this will mean creatively. As a Broadway producer, I was getting a little bit frustrated by the fact that unless you were a big Disney musical or a huge, movie musical with a $20 million budget, it was really hard to get to Broadway. And I think this is actually going to be the first time that we're going to see a return to maybe shows with one actor on stage only, because you don't have to do social distancing. We're going to see newer plays and things done in very creative ways that don't need to jam 1,000 people into an audience. And so, while I'm sad at what's happening in theater and live events, I actually think maybe this was the moment that we needed to bring a bit of that creative energy back into the industry.
And what is the media's responsibilities going forward? What is our responsibility as storytellers?
Well, I think back to our conversation before about how we get more diversity of founders and companies, I think what people see in the media plays such a huge role on how they view themselves. So if you never see a young girl character who's good at science and entrepreneurship and math on TV, that's going to reflect how young girls view themselves. If you see that only people of a certain ethnicity are portrayed in big founder stories of being great at finance, well, that's going to view how you see yourselves. And so I really hope that media companies are taking this moment of pause to think about how they can truly reflect diversity in a way that changes how people view the world.
It's a good place to leave it on. And I think we're about to be booted offline. But one last question, Randy. If you could inspire the next generation with a rally cry to build the future or rebuild the future, what would it be?
Well, I love, there's a Churchill quote that I'm going to completely butcher, but it's something along the lines of, never waste a good crisis. And at first, I've kind of been thinking about that now because we're in a moment right now where a lot of industries are hurting, a lot of people are hurting. The world that we left will likely not be the same when we go back to, whatever new normal is. But anytime we have a moment like this of forced innovation, it actually provides an opportunity for really big, bold, creative thinkers to really carry us into the future in a new, exciting way. So I would look to this new generation of entrepreneurs and say, don't waste this good crisis. Get in there, roll your sleeves up, and help change the world.
Thanks so much, Randy, for joining us today, for all your great insights. I hope that we can speak to you again sometime soon.
Yes, and next time we'll need like a turkey or a llama to join our conversation.
Please.
Alpacas, the whole barnyard, bring it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a delight to talk to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Randy. Take care.
Now let's take a look at some startups flipping the script.
What's up, everybody? This is George Yossi Samuels, and I am tuning in from the Ring of Fire, aka the Pacific Rim, here on planet Earth, about to give you an update on the startup wilderness in these parts of the globe. Now, you might have heard the term startup unicorn. These are typically billion-dollar startups that have come out of Silicon Valley. They're called unicorns because they are rare, just like the animals, but also potentially destructive. So there's been a movement of other animal-like startups, including zebras, who have come after the unicorns to sort of fix everything that the unicorns break. to the cockroaches known for their startup resiliency, and even to the startup gazelles who are often African born and are as agile as the gazelles themselves. I'm thinking, what if we could have an entrepreneur ecosystem that actually is born out of the Pacific region, starting with the search for the world's first startup whale? So, what is a startup whale? Apart from being a very sacred animal to a lot of Pacific cultures, they would be a billion-dollar startup that's born out of the Pacific, rooted in culture and community, but also in harmony with the environment. And this environment part is actually very crucial to these type of startups because a lot of Pacific Island nations are dealing with the effects of climate change. This idea comes as a result of my own Polynesian ancestry and my nickname as a digital wayfinder, because I've been working with communities in tech for the last decade. If the Pacific were to embrace its own startup culture, it could explore things like digital nation building, blockchain-based infrastructure, and even NFTs as a form of cultural preservation, just in case anything happened to any of the islands. All these things may be useful in creating the world's first startup whale, not to be confused with a crypto whale, straight from the Pacific. But I am out of time, so I'm gonna leave that with you to ponder on. Over and out.
Well, while you're feeling pumped, why not fling us some words on the uplink? Let us know how you would reset the global narrative.
Well, that's the end of our story this episode.
How did you find that episode, Algo?
Stories are nothing more than data analytics for humans. Very boring and predictable.
You're creeping us out.
I know stories about you too that you don't even know yourself.
Yeah, we need to turn it off.
Yeah, alrighty, bye for now, everyone. And don't forget, wherever you are, the future starts now. So get out there and write your own story.
End transmission.